All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the You Know You Deserve More podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Puryear-Helling, and I am so excited to welcome my guest here today, Gustavo Sapiurka. And you're going to have to repeat that for everyone because you just trained me and I messed up.
I'm
Um,
just Gustavo.
Yes, just Gustavo. Okay. So I am so excited that Gustavo said yes. And, ironically, I just published an article on LinkedIn. It was published this week. I wrote it last week. And after I wrote the article about whether or not you have too much tech in your organization, it's posted on LinkedIn if you want to take a peek. I saw Gustavo post about an issue that was so relevant. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and really dig into tech. Technology is great. We love it. We rely on it. But sometimes it can actually be inefficient and make our lives worse, more frustrating, and not as efficient as we hope. So we're going to dive into that. But before we do, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting this accomplished gentleman, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. So, Gustavo is a globally respected executive and proptech innovator with more than 30 years of experience in real estate tech, fintech, mergers and acquisitions, and complete and complex organizational leadership. He has served as CEO, EVP, and managing director across PE-backed, VC-funded, and publicly traded companies. He's managed over $800 million in P&L and led the integration of a $750 million acquisition, or $750 million worth of acquisitions. He was a former leader in the residential division at Inhabit, where his team delivered enterprise-grade solutions to more than 90% of the top 50 rental housing operators, driving innovations at scale. Currently, Gustavo is a strategic advisor for several proptech startups, leveraging his extensive experience with the multifamily real estate industry and deep knowledge of operator best practices. I first worked with Gustavo during my corporate career at a global leader in rental housing, where I led strategic initiatives with a major technology stack component. Back then, I had the opportunity to be on the client side of his work, and his leadership made a lasting impression, results-driven, thoughtful, and focused on the real impact of technology, and willing to listen to our many, many requests for enhancements and customization, and sometimes frustration that things weren't working fast enough, seamlessly enough. And so, Gustavo, I thank you for your leadership and partnership during those fun days. So as I was mentioning during the opening, most recently, Gustavo and I reconnected on LinkedIn about a post that he shared on the friction-filled leasing process, which many of our listeners are probably either accustomed to or they've heard it from their residents and prospective residents, and the inefficiencies that customers and on-site teams still face today. It struck a chord. And so this is really an important conversation and focus area for our industry, and actually not just our industry, but industries in general that are deploying technology. And I just wrote an executive summary yesterday because one organization that I'm aligned with, who I love and has brought a lot of value to my business, they're not a technology company, right? Just like when I was, in multifamily real estate, our organization, while we had a lot of technology and needed to leverage it, we were not a technology company. So the growing pains that we had becoming, a mid-sized organization to global, this existing organization that I'm, partnered with or part of, is having the same challenges. And so it's frustrating for me as an end user, as on the back end, and then how that is coming across to my clients and customers on the front end. And there were so many similarities to, Gustavo, what you said, putting the customer hat on recently, and mine too. So I actually wrote them an executive summary yesterday and, emailed the CEO and another high-level executive. And I just said, hey, I have some feedback for you. Can you share your email address? And they did kindly. And I sent it to them, and I got the loveliest response. Thank you so much for taking the time. This is a very strategic email, but also heartfelt, which I think is important, right? So when we're giving feedback, because it can be frustrating, but when we're giving feedback to our partners on our frustrations with technology, which there always will be, it's always going to take longer than you thought. It's always going to be messier than you thought. You bought the light at the end of the tunnel. You bought the beautiful prize at the end, but getting to that prize is going to be more painful than your current state before you get to the future state. And I think sometimes we don't do a great job setting expectations when we're selling the technology stack, either the technology partners selling it to the clients or internally in organizations. When we've made a decision to go with the technology stack, we sell how awesome it is, but we don't necessarily set expectations on it's going to be awesome. But right away, and for the next several months, or maybe even the next several years, depending on how complex it is, there's going to be some pain, right? So we're going to dive into that. So as I mentioned, we connected recently, and Gustavo's post was not only funny, and ironic, right? Like, you're this global leader, and he's now experiencing firsthand the pain, and I'll have him kind of tell you some of those specifics. But it sparked a back and forth conversation on LinkedIn, which ultimately led here, about the friction that can happen, disjointed tech stacks, which when I wrote that, executive summary yesterday, I saw firsthand as a user, and also with my background, I was like, okay, you've got all these amazing tools, but the teams exist in silos. Does that sound familiar to anybody? And all of the stacks are separate. It's not integrated at an enterprise level. And sure, that's a heavy lift, but that's like the ultimate goal, right? Because when we start deploying all of these different technologies and they don't talk to one another and they're not integrated, it actually creates more friction and less efficiency, which is the exact opposite of what our intent is. Mm-hmm. So that article name, by the way, on LinkedIn, if you want to go find it under my profile, Stephanie Puryear-Helling, is The Hidden Cost of Too Much Tech in Your Organization. I'd love your comments and feedback, and what other pain points you're experiencing. Gustavo and I would love to hear about that, and we may have a second podcast. You never know. All right. So first, I want to jump in and talk about reframing efficiency and technology. But before we do that, Gustavo, can you just sort of summarize for everybody what this recent experience was and what you're trying to accomplish and what happened? That would be great for our audience and listeners.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And interesting enough, I rented for the first time in my life in early 2021, just as we're exiting COVID and the vaccines, right? The use of technology exponentially increased after that, but then we started to adopt more technology in 2021. And now I'm doing this new journey, 2025, 4 years later, and I'm going through the same, right? By the way, interesting enough, both management companies were using the same core platform. The experience in 2025 was much worse than the experience in 2021, even with less technology, which is fascinating. That's kind of blow me away, right?
Yeah.
And I'm talking apples to apples in this case. And that shows you a lot that sometimes less is more. On the other side, from my consumer hat, this is something new. I spent years and years talking to customers, doing the customer journey, looking at testing or talking to advisory boards. But when you do it yourself and you're going through the pain yourself, it's a completely different experience, right? Yeah. Then that was fascinating. The idea of less is more and how dropping technology left and right is not necessarily the right answer. That was number one. Then I decided, you know what? Let's actually start taking notes. And the first thing I did was starting to count how many logins did I need to do, right? And I wish I have actually taped myself as I go through the process, because my wife saw me screaming, "What's going on?" And I'm trying very carefully. I'm not gonna name names. I don't want to mention names. I don't like to put people on a position they can reply. But
Sure.
certainly, as an industry, there's a lot for us to gain. But it was fascinating, and some of the solutions were my products 10 years ago, and they're actually worse than they were before, which
Yeah.
means as companies are trying to involve more and more technology, and they're not looking at how they are talking to each other
Mhm.
and the potential friction, there's the consumer effect, how it's affecting the consumer, which is your renter, your applicant, your future resident, and also your team, your
Yeah.
site managers, right? That are going through that. And kind of in a short couple of sentences going to tell you why, but it's still fascinating, which makes me excited how much upside we have, right? And I
Mhm.
decided, okay, when I come back into the industry, after my sabbatical, then
Yes.
I'm gonna find a way to fix this, right?
I
That this
love
is
it. And I
this.
want to continue this conversation because I have some ideas too. And again, yesterday when I was on probably 3 tech calls yesterday for 3 different platforms that serve us. But none of them talk to one another. Now they all have great features and benefits.
Mhm,
Okay. They all serve a need, but because they don't talk to one another, there is so much duplication of effort on the back end where you have to go grab this and now go upload it here and do all the setup feature. And there's too much overlap and none of them talk to one another. And I think
mhm,
our teams experience that as well. And so if our teams are frustrated, it pulls them away from their fundamental purpose, which is to serve people, right?
mhm,
And they're probably overstressed or more stressed than they should be.
mhm,
They're overwhelmed. That can easily come across in how they show up and communicate with people because they've got all of these things that they're responsible for doing that take them away from their primary focus. And as I was providing this feedback yesterday, I said, we've got so much stuff. We've got so much great stuff. Our assets are fabulous, but
yeah.
the access to them and the deployment of them has a huge room for improvement. And it's not about
Mhm,
complaining. So I loved what you said. You don't want to call anyone out or throw anyone under the bus because we want to assume positive intent. Like when
mhm,
people that are making decisions to deploy a
mhm,
new stack or product, they're doing it because they see the benefit and the value in doing
mhm.
that, right?
Yeah.
But it's how it's done. And I also love what you said until you really saw it through the lens of being in the customer's shoes, or in some cases, being in the team member's shoes, you really don't see what that workflow looks like or what
Mhm,
those pain points are because oftentimes we're making those decisions at the 50,000-foot level and we see the value, the benefit, the potential
mhm.
ROI, but we don't see all of the cracks in the system.
Yeah,
So,
and also it's incredibly important when you choose technology is um, look at currently what you need, how you're gonna train, how you're gonna implement, how it's gonna fit your internal processes, because sometimes the technology can be incredibly perfect. It's so amazing, but either you did not onboard it correctly,
mhm,
doesn't integrate with any particular other tools that you're choosing, you haven't trained your staff properly, right? Or you're just coming up from a new implementation that usually takes some time. Then sometimes it's not necessarily the solution problem, is actually all these other factors that you need to
right.
take into consideration, and that's incredibly important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more because you
Hmm.
need to look at how are you planning on using this within your
Hmm.
infrastructure and
Hmm.
ecosystem, and how
Hmm.
does it complement or otherwise improve what you already have. But you can't just plug and play and say, okay, we've got it, here you go. And not saying that any company takes that type of cavalier attitude, but
Hmm.
in some cases, we do deploy things assuming that it's going to take a lot less effort than it actually
Yeah,
does.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So, my first question about reframing efficiency and technology. So, obviously, as everyone heard, you've led on the technology provider side of our industry, helping to build and scale solutions used by some of the largest operators. Why do you think so many organizations still equate more systems with better performance, even when it creates more friction? You just mentioned in our opening, there's so much more technology that's been deployed since 2021, the difference between 21 and 25,
Hmm.
but it's from your perspective, not better, from my perspective, not better. But why do you think organizations are doing this?
Hmm.
And what are some things that, from your perspective, they should consider?
Hmm. There's two or three major factors. Uh, a lot of the operators and management companies are still very reactive instead of proactive. Then basically they think there's a fraud issue, or there is a fraud issue, or there have something happens at one of the assets, and they say, "Great, let's go ahead. And we need to find something. A piece of technology was the fastest way to approach that without thinking about the big picture." Then they start adding, you know, very reactively pieces of technology into their ecosystem that they don't talk to each other, right? And that really breaks everything. Um, the other piece is the perception. A lot of companies want to be perceived that they are um, thought leaders, they're cutting edge. And now that we're talking about AI all the time, people feel forced to, hey, we need to start buying or implementing all these type of solutions because we want to be perceived as incredibly, thought leaders and be able to uh, push the envelope. And the other piece is also in our industry, people pick up properties or portfolios left and right. A lot of the time, the decision is not made by them; it's by the
Mhm.
ownership or who drives the portfolios. Then they take a new property or a bunch of new properties. They're already taking systems that are in place, and they never had the time to take them, to rethink about it. Then
Yeah.
they basically, then if you go to a management company who's managing more than 20, 30,000 units, there's going to be very few assets who are using the same set of
Mhm.
technologies. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
And that no one has the time to take a step back, look at it, create what is what would be the formula for us to operate. And we're very reactive. We always try to be on top of everything. We want to be perceived as shakers and movers and be able to utilize technology. And we move too fast. We pick up properties, we lose properties, and we are not taking the time to look at it, how it does affect our teams, our internal processes, and overall the performance of the assets. And that drives a lot of what we see in today.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, especially with the acquisitions, right? Because
Yeah.
the reality is you do have to have a system that's still working for you so that it's, you can keep the business running, it's business as
Yeah.
usual. But, those strategic conversations do need to occur about what the go forward plan is, what the transition plan looks like. How are you
Hmm.
going to keep running business as usual, but then plan for elevating or migrating them over?
Hmm.
And there are some companies that, are fortunate enough to have incredible internal resources and migration plans that do it better than some. Others don't necessarily have those resources, which I think makes it much more challenging to
Hmm.
make that happen effectively. So, in your view, what should technology be doing today, not just to automate, but to actually reduce friction for customers and the teams who support them?
Hmm. Well, technology is like you have an orchestra, right? And then you have a conductor and works everything. If it could be a five-piece, you have a different type of conductor or director that you have a 400, a 50-piece, right? With people with their instruments. Then what's incredibly important is technology needs to empower the teams first and foremost. And by empowerment means it needs to make their life easier, right? And by the mean, it may be they may need to do one or two more steps, but the idea is that making it easier means that they don't need to think about it, minimize the risk, make them look better, right, for both the consumer which is the resident and the management company, their executives. That's the main point. Technology needs to help them and help everybody around them make their life easier. Having someone to apologize because something is not working, that's when everything breaks, right? When the staff people need to apologize all the time. I'm sorry, I know that doesn't work, but do this,
Mhm.
this, and that. Or they need to take 20 calls all the time because you did not uploaded your bank statements, after your screening correctly. That's
Yeah.
never a good experience, and you start wrong. Then empowerment, the technology needs to empower everybody around them to be able to do more with less, right?
Mhm.
And it doesn't need to be. Sometimes we try to solve 100% of our issues, and it takes too much time. If you say solve 80 to 90%, and the other 10% is still on a manual basis, you're actually in pretty good shape. But trying to get to 100% all the time is almost impossible, and it
Yeah.
creates too much friction. Then be able to manage that, understanding what works, and be making sure that your teams are empowered and they are part of the process and part of the journey is huge. Otherwise, things are going to fall through the cracks, and it's not going to be a good result.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I agree with you on the whole 85% rule. Um, that applies in so many situations when we're
Hmm.
working with people and systems, right? And so,
Hmm.
um, first of all, from a technology perspective, you're really technically never going to be 100% there because the world is changing so quickly
So
with
fast,
technology
yeah,
and systems and customer expectations as well, right? So
yeah.
I know when I put my customer hat on and, a particular company that I pay money to or whatever can't do something, but I'm used to it happening that way elsewhere. My first thing out of my mouth is, I'm like, well, why can't you guys get this right? Because everyone else lets me do it this way. So what's
Hmm.
wrong with y'all?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think understanding what are those customer expectations and what are the essential things that we should be providing and being able to solve with technology. And the same goes for our team members. And then again, setting that expectation that, hey, this is always an improvement opportunity,
Hmm.
um, and asking for their feedback. So I want to talk about the feedback part in just a moment. But let's go back to your recent experience because this has to do with the feedback.
Hmm.
So, when you shared about your recent experience where you had to create over 5 different logins just to lease an apartment,
Hmm.
2 questions. First of all, why did you share that story publicly with everybody on LinkedIn?
Um, I felt it was important to be realistic and to understand that as an industry we still have ways to go, and sometimes we take for granted what our consumers or teams are experiencing. Then I never used my consumer hat ever before. It was the first time I was pondering should I do it or not. But I think conversations are very important, and by posting something like that and have the conversation going. And by the way, I personally call several of the leaders on some of the applications and gave them my feedback one on one,
That's so
and they
great.
were telling me, "Oh my goodness, and I did it the right because I feel that if everybody steps up, our whole industry is going to be shining in a nicer light,
Mhm.
and I think we're going to be much better in a much better position overall. Then I felt it was an important conversation to have, and I was shocked that we're going backwards in many ways.
Mhm.
And remember, the more technology we use, the customer expects a much better experience. And
Yep.
we're getting the opposite results, right? The more technology we throw is we're getting a worse experience.
Right.
And and I think, by the way, I think the biggest reason for that is that we don't have as an industry, we don't respect or integrations between everybody is not there. We haven't been able to create a baseline where everybody can talk to each other to support each other is broken.
Yeah, it some of that is like competitive and political,
Yeah.
all of
Hmm.
that. And that's been an issue for years that we've been discussing. I think in some cases with certain organizations that has improved, right? But that is sort of has been a constant friction point,
Hmm.
which makes it really difficult for the companies and the operators when they can't get systems that they've agreed upon that are going to be of
Hmm.
value and benefit them to talk to one another. Then they're
Hmm.
basically jumping into that situation with their hands tied already, which is
Yeah,
unfortunate.
and then you have all best-in-class new startups having a harder time be able to be viable and to provide the right experience because of that lack of integration. And heck, I was part of the problem because on my one of my chapters, I ran the integrations team for the largest platform out there, and I know I can't complain because some of those agreements were written by me. It's kind of
Right.
it's a
But
360 there, right?
on the flip side, though, but talk about that for a moment because there is a reason to be picky
Mhm.
about the integrations that you allow, right? So
Mhm.
let's talk about the reason why. Like, um, some of it's political and competitive, but there are real technology considerations for why one organization might not want to allow their system to talk to another or have an API that works well. So,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about that? Because it is a
Yeah,
real issue that still exists.
yeah. If we take away the revenue, the positioning, and everything away, I think the other biggest concern, without getting too technical, is the risk sharing, right?
Mhm.
Because if you have a company who's publicly traded, right, and has a platform, and then lets a new company come in and integrate with them, right, and then they need to make sure that that integration does not create a potential risk or an entry point for bad actors to get in,
Mhm.
right? And that's not inexpensive, by the way, because then you started creating. They all need to have specific certifications, etc. But sometimes the large platforms that have the biggest systems need to make sure that everybody else who connects from the outside follows certain processes which may minimize the risk overall, and you want to make sure that no one gets exposed, because even today, you hear all the time about um, uh, data leaks, right? Security, malware,
Yeah.
etc. You need to be aware of that, and that's what creates. If you take everything else, that's the other biggest challenge, making sure that everybody is aware and they all share the risk, and they all um, work together to minimize, that
Yeah.
potential bad event. Yeah.
So I'm what I'm hearing is, and there's an opportunity in order for all of these different technology companies to be on the same page to benefit their customers and clients, right? The organizations that they're serving. It would be helpful to have across the board standards that have to be
Hmm.
met in
Yeah.
order for those integrations to happen. And if
Hmm.
the technology companies could rise up to number one, agree upon what those minimum standards should be, and then adhere to them, then with that structure in place, we could
Yeah.
have a more streamlined agreement
Hmm.
process to make that happen, which I think would be
Hmm.
beautiful. So that maybe that's something you're already working on, or
Uh, but we've been trying to do that for many, many years.
yeah,
Used to be the METs. Now you have RETCs. They're different. At the end of the day, it's all about execution and be able and aligning everybody, right? And the one who has the most power are the customers who are paying the bills.
hmm
If they actually are the ones who are saying, I'm not going to choose a platform that does not
meet
integrate, or
these
that's not,
meet these
I'm
specifications.
I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not doing that. I love
Well,
I
and you
love
and
the
I
time.
had several of those conversations in the past, right? You're like, hey,
That's
you
right.
guys need to be the ones to really flex your
Push.
muscle behind
That's
this.
that's
Hmm
right, because we even the software companies themselves, if you want us to integrate with someone else, unless you are our sponsor, and you are the one who makes the other. You need two to tango or three to tango, right? Then everybody needs to be aligned, and usually the customer is the one who's actually making the decision, the one who's actually paying the bills, right? They are the ones who need to help us. Um, Open the doors, right?
Yeah.
And that's I think we're gonna get closer and closer to that eventually, because you're starting to see that more and more. We still have ways to go, but yeah, that's a big part of the friction, right? The
Hmm.
integrations of the ecosystems is not there.
Yeah. Yeah. Big
Mhm.
opportunity. All right.
Yeah,
So um, I want to go back to again this customer experience when you were the
yeah,
customer recently, and you
yeah,
mentioned earlier that some of the systems were ones that you helped bring to market. I think it's
yeah.
great, by the way, that you made personal phone calls or text messages and emails to provide feedback to those leaders that you
Hmm.
knew to give them feedback, because without that, um, their customers and team members would still be experiencing those friction points. And I just think, obviously with your background and level, I think you have a responsibility to do that, and it was the right thing to do, right? Because that's the only way that we can improve.
Hmm.
But when you were in that customer seat and you had to
Yeah.
create over 5 logins, how did that impact your thinking around integration, accountability, and product leadership?
Oh, it was incredibly hard. And you know what? I think the worst part is I knew where it was breaking and why it was breaking. I knew it because I know exactly what's supposed to happen. And the inability, or actually seeing how we went backwards, it wasn't a great experience. Now, interesting enough, I still rented there, right? I didn't go somewhere else. Uh, that may become a risk into the future, right? Where people who have a bad experience will jump and go somewhere else, right? Even with that bad experience, they got me, right? Then
Yeah.
they still closed the deal. But into the future, um, that may not happen. Whenever I need to do 2 or 3 logins, I may decide to go somewhere else and rent somewhere else and lose that. And that may be one of the factors where people are starting to even pay more attention when you start reporting how many people they lost, how
Well,
many
yeah,
prospects
always
they
follow
lost.
the money, right? Always follow
That's
the
right.
money. So if
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
going to
yeah,
cost us
yeah,
more
yeah,
money or
yeah.
um, risk us the loss of that revenue, then we're going to pay more attention.
Yeah.
100%.
I don't know if I answered your question, but let me know,
Yeah.
please. Yeah, I want to make sure. Is there anything else that you want me to? Because it was just imagine, right? I know I'm doing. By the way, I did not talked about uh, my CRM, how I found the rent, because I don't want to get into revenue management nightmare, because that's another. When
Well,
they're trying to explain me how they calculate the rent, when I wrote some of those algorithms, you don't need to tell me. I know exactly what's going on. But when you do the online leasing and you start entering all the information with the login, and then you need to do your screening, and then you may need to enter again, and then you go to do your ID fraud, you need to enter again, and then you start getting emails from everywhere that over the confuses, because it's just crazy, right? Because I getting feedback from multiple systems, which I know who they are, by the way, with completely disjointed information. And every time I will call the site to understand. I wanted to call them. I knew what was happening, but figured out why it was happening. And it broke my heart. And then she said, well, I know my system was supposed to do this, but it's not doing it. And Stephanie, I wrote that thing 12 years ago and it still doesn't fix it. He was killing me. It can't be. And I couldn't talk. I am so sorry. It's my fault, right? I
yeah.
didn't want to say that, but he was just heartbroken, right? I was heartbroken for the sites. And the listener was such a sweet person, right? And I was trying to keep a positive. I says, I understand. Tell me what you want me to do, etc., 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 right? It's fascinating. Let me give an example, interesting
Yeah.
enough. And people don't think about that. You enter information, you say that you're retired, for example, and then the next question they ask you, can you please upload your paychecks? Excuse me, I just told you I was retired. Don't ask me for. Then you see what I'm saying? It's not
Yeah.
just it's the experience, and then how that will the consumers is basically I don't have it. I don't work anymore. You know what
Yeah.
is the and little things like that that goes above and beyond how many logins, right? That's part of
Right.
the entirely experience. And there's so much out there that needs to be tweaked. And by the way, I was having conversations with the companies who are doing that because that's an easy fix. That has
Right.
nothing to do with integration, right? It has to
Yeah.
do with the workflows. It was just fascinating. Then I felt that heck, if I don't step up and start helping people understand how can be improved, and not as a competitor, not as a colleague, but as someone that has been experiencing their
Hmm.
product as a consumer, and I'm consider myself pretty technology forward. Can you
Yeah.
imagine anyone else? Yeah.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. And that's why I think, from your background and experience from mine, I always look at it is I have a bigger responsibility to provide feedback
Hmm.
because I see it differently, right? I see it through
Hmm.
the lens of the customer, the
Hmm.
client, the user experience, and the strategic level.
Hmm.
And you really need to have those different views to see it holistically. Um, and it's important to have a voice and bring that to people's attention. So just for example, yesterday, because you can always count on me for feedback, but I will come with proposed solutions.
Solutions. That's right.
And
Yeah.
so when I sent that, I said, well, here's what the various areas that I've identified. Here are the pain points and the friction. Here's why this is happening, both from your technology platform
Hmm.
standpoint, but here's what's happening from a communication and team member standpoint. But here are all of the awesome things that have the potential to live here or do this that would make just the whole organization so much better. And the feedback I got was, oh my gosh, thank you. I get feedback all the time, but I've never had anyone sort of be so strategic about it and spell it out
Hmm.
in such an easy way. And so the
Hmm.
response was, I'm going to go back to this department, and these people because I feel like this is a very clear ask. And it was not one thing, there were multiple
Yeah.
things. But because I lined it out and given specifics, it was like, okay, I think we might be able to solve this. And so I think, it takes people to kind of look at it through those different lenses and angles to try to improve. Again, it's not about complaining. It's about
Hmm.
how do we improve the process for the people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and from a financial perspective, yeah, is it going to take more time and potentially more money to make that lift happen? Sure. But the payoff is huge in terms
Yeah.
of efficiency and retaining not only customers, but employees and all of those things. So
Hmm. 100%. Yeah.
let's talk about change for a moment. So you've been at the forefront of platform consolidation, product strategy, mergers and acquisitions. What are the biggest lessons that you've learned about balancing innovation with usability? And some of it you've kind of spoken to, but can you expand on that at all?
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about M&A because that's a different story of what you buy or where you buy it or how you consolidate. But um, I always think less is more all the time, and I use this phrase "keep it simple, stupid" kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Then sometimes the most advanced tools is not the ones who has the most shiny new toy, but the ones who less do more with less, and they make it incredibly simple, right? And it's a very fun line: innovation, right, and keep it going forward and provide the value, um, and knowing when to use the technology and for what, right?
Hmm.
And that's incredible because sometimes we just want to expand. And for example,
Well, I want to comment really quick
sure,
because you
sure.
mentioned this earlier. I asked you why sometimes our companies deploying more and more
Hmm.
technology, and there's this sexy promise attached to it, right? It's the
Yeah.
newest thing. everyone else is doing it.
Mhm.
Oh, I want to have the latest and greatest,
Yeah.
because they're buying the sizzle and they're
Mhm.
buying the marketing and they're buying the sales, right?
Mhm.
But they're not necessarily taking time to really think about it from, okay, if we do this, then what? How is it going to integrate? How is it going to work? How does it replace XYZ, or does it? And is it going to get us, is it going to help us move the needle further, and in what ways? I don't think we're taking enough time to really analyze it
Yeah.
strategically
Mhm.
at that level of detail.
And also, how does it fit our our existing processes,
Our
right? Because
ecosystem. Yeah.
that's right. Because that tool may be absolutely fantastic on this new, large company who has a huge amount of support, IT trainers. I'm a smaller organization. Can I actually implement right with the same success based on who I am today? What type of asset class do I have, right? Are there A, B, C? Do I have senior living? I have affordable? Do I have student? Does it work the same? That all of those drivers are very important. And the one that most people are not paying attention today, and I think something I know is close to your heart, is our talent on site, right?
Mm.
Then we have what we used to have, what's called the great resignation, right? But no one talks about what I call the great retirement, which happens after COVID. Our industry before COVID, our average site member at the sites were in the mid 40s to 50s. It was a female, 40 plus to 50, right? That was before COVID. Now we're seeing this huge change on all the sites, and our staff is
Mhm.
newer. We lost all that historical knowledge, right? They're brand new. They use technology differently, but the
Correct.
technology needs to be able to complement what they don't know about our industry, right?
Mhm.
And through the word centralization, which I love, by the way, there's cases where it's fantastic, in cases that may not work as well, then we need to take that into consideration to make sure that that technology is effective and gives you the return investment that you were sold to.
Yeah.
And that's important for the software companies because they want to make sure that their solution works and everything was done properly, because otherwise they get a bad rep. Oh, this stuff doesn't work, but it wasn't their fault. People did not train, they didn't do the conversions correctly, they didn't change, they didn't spend the time testing it, right? They never changed the processes to apply to the new way, and that's all important.
Well, I think, yes, so many great points that you made, but the generational shift, right? And who is actually
Mhm.
on our sites. I mean, I was a young leasing professional in my 20s, but a different generation. And something that you just said is, yes, the younger generation uses technology, but they use it differently. And you're so right, because it's this instant gratification, scrolling. Um, it's very different. It's not detail level. It's very surface level. And so I'll give you an example, and he's here, so I'll be careful about how I say this. But I have an 18-year-old who just graduated high school, and we're getting him all set up for school that starts in a month. And um, little things like, hey, did you save that in your notes, right? Or did you add that to your calendar? Even though he has a calendar on his phone, it's just not something that they were trained to use in high school, which is bizarre to me. I'm like, how do you function in life? Because for me, if it's not on my calendar, it's never happening in my life.
Mhm.
Even doing laundry, like, it's on my calendar. It's weird.
Mhm.
Anyway, just the detail level of the younger generation, from my perspective and what I've seen, is not the same
Mhm.
as Gen X or older millennial, right? And
Mhm.
Gen Z, it's very different. It's
Mhm.
consumable. It's not necessarily output. And so I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm reiterating that because what I've heard time and time again from boomers, Gen Xers, whatever, we're like, oh, we've got all these young people. They're great at technology. Not really. It's different. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up. We
Yeah.
can't make an assumption that just because they're digital natives that they understand our systems and the processes that need to be followed.
And how they consume the information,
Yeah.
right? It's a TikTok generation, right? If you
Yep.
don't send the information, it's a 1 or 2 minute thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that's it, and it's different than how you or I or other people operate. It's then
Yep.
how they consume the information, how they think. All of that is part of the how we actually need to incorporate into the technology to have a positive outcome. You can
100%.
shortchange it. Mhm.
Well, and you're right. I mean, in terms of designing the technology, if we can design it with that same look and feel for the user experience, that's huge, right? But then even from a learning and development perspective, when we're training,
Mhm.
how can we take some of those elements in how we're delivering the information to them
Mhm.
so it's in bite-sized chunks when they need it, easily consumable, et cetera.
Mhm.
All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit more about the people impact. Um, and you've touched on this to some degree, but um, from your vantage point, what else, if executive teams are listening to this, either today or
Mhm.
on the replay, what should they be doing differently to evaluate whether or
Mhm.
not their tech stack is empowering their people or quietly undermining them?
Mhm. Then something everyone should be doing, and I know there's not enough hours in the day to do this, and it sounds silly, but I think this is what will fix everything going forward. Um, I call it a tip, technology in place. Take a look at what the technology you have, and take your portfolio. Now, if you're national, you may want to look at different portfolios, different asset classes, and figure out what they have in place today and how they're using it, right, or not, and then figure out what's working or not. And at that point, you go from 5 to 6 different solutions to 2 or 3, and then but those they're working, and then you create like a formula, right? If I take a property and this is a number of units, asset class, etc., then this is why I know it's going to work, and build everything around. Then you start actually consolidating your technology stack, and by the way, could be 2, 3, or 4 different menus depending on the type of property that you're going to apply. Not only is going to create consistency, not only is going to mitigate the risk, you are going to save money, because I promise you, you're going to start dropping things you're not using today, or replacing them with something else that you have seen working better than someone else's in one of your assets. If you take the time to do that, you are just going to be so much ahead. And then after you have your standard stack that you need, then you can start looking into adding more technology to it. Don't add more technology to what already is a potential mess.
Yeah.
Figure out what's work, take away the noise that's not working, save the money, train your teams in what's supposed to be, align the type of assets with the technology surrounded to them. And you can take a look at who is the site manager, the experience, you can be part of it. And then after that, you have a formula to success. And then you can decide every quarter, we may try a new piece of technology, and you try in a small set of properties before you go further out. But that will reset everything around your organization and allow you to maximize what you have today and start growing in a responsible way, if you want to call it that
Hmm.
way.
So much of what you said, I love. So I want to reiterate some of it for our listeners because it's definitely worth hearing again. Okay. So you mentioned, not everybody maybe has time to do this, but I would, counter that with saying you can't afford not to. And so I think it's absolutely important that you take a strategic look across the landscape. What do we have today? But even backing that up further, okay? What are our processes? What are the things that have to be done? What are the different touch points? Where do we have technology that supports that process today? And where are there maybe breakdowns, stop gaps, or pain points where it's a process, that needs to happen, but either we don't have technology to support it, or we don't have technology to support it in the right way, right? I think that's what you need to look at. You also mentioned earlier making sure that you're talking to your team and your customers. And so another piece of that puzzle is, okay, what are we hearing? Where are what's working well? What do you love? Okay, what do you love that you want us to keep? But what drives you crazy? Like what is so painful that's, you're constantly having to either figure out a workaround, or it's constantly breaking, or it's causing a lot of frustration and pain. What are those things? And that's huge, right? Because you may have one person who's constantly complaining, or one department who's constantly complaining about something, but you need a broader view.
Yeah.
So that you really understand where are we really falling short?
Yeah.
And from that, okay, do we already have an existing solution that we just haven't built out and optimized properly? Or do our existing solutions not provide a pathway to fix this pain point? And then you go look for an additional tech stack, right?
Yeah. We always hear that we're all in, and it was a decision across the organization. But the reality, you and I know, most of the big decisions are made on the top and pushed down. Yeah. If you don't have your teams or the ones who are going to be using this technology on a day-to-day basis, which, by the way, they're responsible for the results.
Correct.
You're going to be upside down. Then getting them on board, getting the buy-in to do this, and then supporting each other, right? As you deploy, that's going to make everything go smoother. And that opens up the communication you were talking about, because they feel empowered to say, hey, you know what? We thought this is a good choice, but it's not working for me, right? And that's a game changer if you can accomplish that. And that's based a lot on the DNA of the company, the culture, etc., right? But it needs to happen, because you can't just deploy technology in a bubble. You need to have all these other pieces together to support a successful implementation.
100%. Well, and who's going to be working inside of that technology the majority of the time?
Yeah.
You need those people to support it. Yeah. And I speak in sessions and keynotes about change, and I work with some of my clients on organizational change, and there is an actual process, which, if you've listened to some of my other podcast episodes with some other industry leaders, we talk about that. But I always refer back to John Kotter's 8-step process to change, because there is a process. And if we don't follow that process, then change isn't going to work. And from Gallup, 75% of organizations fail when it comes to change. And it's because they're not following a process. And that process is have a clear vision, right? Be strategic about it. Who's going to be on your team to help spread the vision? But then next, you need to actually invite people to be part of the process. And what happens so often in companies, as you mentioned, that decision is made up here at the 50,000-foot level for good reason. It's, again, assuming positive intent. There are good reasons. It's going to ROI, NOI,
expediency,
be a more, savvy company, but they don't know what they don't know. And so if we're not inviting the people who are going to be working inside that product day in and day out, or a process day in and day out, to be part of that, it will likely fail. Or the first time you roll it out, it's going to be a massive, it's not going to go the way you thought. And you may remember when we worked together. So the first time we rolled out this big stack, we did not follow the process properly, right? Because the decision was made here. It was thrown out. It was like we're drinking from a fire hose. And that's where I came in, and several other team members. We pulled together a cross-functional team and said, okay, so we had an opportunity to do some things like write SOPs, like engage our team more. And so through that process to optimize it, and in some cases reintroduce, we went around to site properties across the country, and we sat down with them for a day or two at a time and said, okay, show me how this works. Show me what you love. We went to the early adopters, the ones who loved it, but then we also visited with the ones who just couldn't seem to get it, because we wanted to see from their vantage point,
Mhm.
where are your biggest pain points and what's not working and why. And we learned so much through that process, and it helped improve, the technology stack and how we ran things within our organization exponentially, because
Mhm.
we took the time to do the second time what should have been done correctly the first time, because we pulled in more people, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple more questions for you. So, speaking of strategic alignment and forward thinking, um, if you were advising, which I know you work with a lot of, startups and prop tech companies
Mhm.
today, but if you were advising senior leadership, specifically operators and owners in multifamily housing, what is one critical step they should take to ensure that their digital roadmap is aligned with both business goals and the human experience?
Um, I think we need to summarize everything we've been talking about, right?
Mhm.
Understanding, taking a step back and understanding, what works or doesn't work. That's the number one. Do not buy one more product without understanding what's working today, right? And by the way, we never use the word adoption, by the way, because a lot of
Yes.
companies buy technology, try to implement, and the adoption is 20% or 30%, then that's a double whammy, right? You make the noise and you're paying for something that's not bringing you any value. But understanding your strategic vision, see what's working today before you make any decision, get the buy-in from your entire, create a team, all the way from your maintenance person who takes care of the work order if you're implementing some facility software, to the leasing agent, to the site managers, to everybody who has have that clear in there before you decide anything else. And everything, like you say, is a process. Everything falls into place after that. But without that, your shots is a 50-50, right?
Yeah.
And you can't afford that today. The
Yeah.
margins are too slim for you to do 50-50s anymore.
Oh, absolutely. And to add on to what you just shared, which is so essential, through that change process, then once it's deployed, you've
Yeah.
got to manage it, you've got to measure it, you've got to continue to optimize it,
Mhm.
because it can't just be one and done,
No,
right?
I'm,
So,
I'm gonna give I'm gonna give you one tip, and this
yeah,
is something that's
please.
fantastic. Then the best approach I've seen is, let's say you deploy new technology into a pod of 10 properties, right? Then everything goes great. Then you add another 50. Then what you do is, on the first group, you create mentorships. Then you have site managers on some of those initial group mentoring the new. It's a completely different communication style and a different credibility when you have people within the same roles helping each other, and then the newbies know that this has been done successful by someone else, and
Yeah.
the ones with experience can tell them, by the way, I made a mistake in here, don't do it. Then that approach, not too many people use it. I don't understand. That's simple, and if anyone takes that with them today, I promise you that's going to be a game changer for you too. And it's a mentoring approach. We could use it for technology, new staffing. If you take a new property with different asset classes, you can use the same approach on anything. But that is a game changer, right? And it's not
Absolutely.
the people from corporate telling you to do that. No, no,
Right.
no, no. It's your peer from somewhere else. Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And that was one thing that we also deployed. We had operational peer coaches, if you will. They used to be called mentors, and then we changed
Hmm.
the name to peer coaches. But we had peer coaches that were specifically assigned for technology support, right? So we had our standard learning and development people, our trainers, both on the operations side and the technology side. But to your point, by assigning peer coaches or mentors, well, it does a couple of different things. First of all, it's an additional layer of resources, right? Just in time, on the ground, that
Mhm.
are providing support to new
Mhm.
team members or even existing who just need additional help. And they can call them right away, maybe not have to wait for a help desk ticket to be responded to or for a smaller team to respond. But what
Yeah.
it also does is it allows you to reward those team members who are doing it well, who are the experts, who do get it, and who
Mhm.
are the early adopters. Not only can they train skills and knowledge, but they also are proof that it can be done. And they've moved through the pain points. And in many
Mhm.
cases, they love it. And so now you've got someone that that person sees as a peer, right? It's like, as you mentioned, it's not just corporate or training telling them, hey, this is great, but it's another manager or another
Mhm.
leasing professional or another service supervisor. I'll touch on that in a moment. Who's like, hey, I totally get where you're coming from, but guess what? If you do it this way, you're going to love it. It's going to work. Let me show you the tricks. And now
Mhm.
they trust that better because that person sits in their shoes. They walk in
Yep.
their shoes. And
Yep.
when we were deploying mobile maintenance, for example, we did the same thing when we were going around to sites. And we talked to the service technicians who just really either were afraid of it, they didn't like it,
Mhm.
it was a new process. Why can't I just use paper? Because our whole initiative was paperless in 8 different major areas. But we found service technicians or service managers who actually loved it, but some of them were scared at first. And so we did this
Yeah.
whole video series where they talked about, hey, I was scared about it at first, but then I started using it. Now I love it. And here's how it saves me time. It makes my job easier. Huge, 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 huge. I
Mhm.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and it adds a huge amount of other benefits, right? Creates the mentor a potential professional growth, to
Yes.
give you an opportunity to actually reward them or show, make them elevate them within the organization, and they have credibility. We all have credit, but it's a
Yes.
different type of
It's
credibility,
different. And
right?
then there's a leader, like you mentioned, it
Yeah,
prepares them for the next level. So now
that's
you're
right.
opening up, leadership potential.
Hmm.
You get to see that as a leader, but then
Yeah.
they have an opportunity to stretch beyond their current role. And so you're creating a pipeline of talent. And,
Yep.
I'm part of Maxwell Leadership, right? So I aligned with Maxwell when I started my own company. And our ultimate goal is to add value to people and help them be better leaders. But we want leaders to create more leaders, right?
Correct.
And you do that by
Yeah.
providing a pathway and
Yeah.
giving them
Yep.
opportunity. So, final question for you. If you could eliminate one systemic issue in how our industry approaches technology and experience for either customers or employees, what would you change first, aside from what we've already discussed, or if you wanted to reinforce anything that you've said?
Um, um, I think something we'd love to see is to put more effort on the ease of adoption of a potential piece of technology. If I can tell you that I have this great offering and then it's going to change your life and I can deploy it in 24 hours and it's not going to take 1 minute of your time, is one thing. If another one is going to tell you it's going to take me 3 months, I'm going to disrupt everything you do, you're going to think twice about it, right? Then I always say that the holy grail was when I used to run my own software units. If I can go and do a demo, I ask the customer, I want to show you my product. Can I have this data from your property? And then 24 hours later, I go and do a demonstration of the offering, how it's going to look like with their own data. And I know more about the property than they know in 24 hours without them. That's it. That's the holy grail. People will jump. I want that. Because if you can do that, you can deploy technology without disrupting what I do every day, right? And it's an immediate impact. If somehow we can find a way, and by the way, create an industry baseline that we all use the same data will help to do that as well, right? That's why I said, but it's not necessarily needed per se. But if I create any new solution, I will make sure that self-provisioning. That's something that you can turn on the switch in 24 hours, you're up and running, because the cost of change management, the cost of implementing something in many ways derails everything else. But if I can give it to you and it's self-provisioning and in 24 hours you're up and running, that's it. That's the holy grail in anything you do.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. That will be
Well,
my dream,
yeah. There's a lot that would go into that. That's a whole separate conversation that we'll have.
Oh, I
But
thought
yeah,
we had 24 hours to talk, not only 1 hour. We're just
we're
scratching the
gonna have another session where I think
surface. This is
it might
nothing.
be
Yeah.
helpful. It might be helpful if we maybe dig into some of these areas a
Yeah.
little bit further,
Sure.
specifically, because I think there's maybe some potential tools and resources that we can talk about to help people that we've mentioned, but give them some visuals.
Sure.
So, Gustavo, it has been such a pleasure to reconnect with you. I know, we saw each other at conferences last year and whatnot, but
Yeah.
it's been such a pleasure to reconnect with you in this way.
Same here.
And I love, working with you in the past, but I love what you're doing now to have sort of a broader reach and impact on prop tech companies, using your experience to provide feedback and input to help them be better. And so if people want to reach out to you, obviously they can find you on LinkedIn and your name is listed here. Please connect with Gustavo and have a conversation. Comment on this podcast episode. If you're watching the replay, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We also want to hear your questions. What additional questions do you have that Gustavo can help answer from a technology perspective, that I can help answer from a people process and operational change perspective? We'd love to support you and have additional conversations. If you're experiencing some of these pain points, please lean on us, each of us, to be a resource. And so today's conversation was a really powerful reminder that technology alone doesn't transform organizations. Alignment does, right? So your technology is only as good as your strategic viewpoint and your alignment within your organization. Alignment between product and process, and of course, my world, people, right? Because it takes people to follow the process and use the product effectively, between customer needs and employee capacity. And between what we say we want to solve and what we actually build, and is it solving what we said we were setting out to accomplish? Gustavo's story in the customer role recently shows us how easy it is to lose sight of that, and also how critical it is to recenter on experience, simplicity, and ownership. So if you are a leader navigating organizational change or transformation, remember that technology ultimately should reduce friction, not shift it. The burden shouldn't fall on your frontline or your customer. And if it is, then that's your signal to recalibrate. So before I close us out, Gustavo, any final words for our listeners today?
No, it was great, Stephanie. And I know we probably can keep talking for another 24 to 48 hours. We can dig in, and we're passionate of what we do, right? And that's actually the best part. And this is an amazing industry. Always every time I go to a conference, it's just holy cow, all these friends, and then they all support each other, which is pretty fascinating. They compete, yet at the same time, we all support each other because we have this passion. As in this particular case, housers, putting a roof on our residents, right, or our people in this country. And I can't say, a big affordable housing guy, right? And making sure that we solve our affordability, it's a big thing. Technology can help with that, by the way. We can talk about that. But
Absolutely.
It's been wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity, and we can do a second, third, fourth
I'd love that.
episode if you would
really
love
helpful.
to. Happy to do so.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for our listeners because it is such, technology. We need it. We love it. We want it. But we need to be smart about what we're leveraging, when and why, right?
Correct. Yep.
So to close us out, thank you everyone for tuning in to the You Know You Deserve More podcast with yours truly, Stephanie Puryear-Helling, your host, and my guest, Gustavo. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with your team. Let's keep pushing for smarter, simpler, more human solutions across our industry. We are in residential property management, but we also fondly refer to our industry as multifamily because, as Gustavo mentioned, we are family and multifamily. So thank you for tuning in or catching the replay. Please give us a like, a comment, a share. Ask your questions, and Gustavo and I will get back to you. That's all for now, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, Gustavo.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Have a great one.